Good morning or afternoon. My name is Vanessa Munoz, and I will be today's moderator. We're fortunate to have everyone join us here today, and joining us for today's webinar on understanding sludge, biosolids, and community health. This webinar is hosted by Hispanic Access and Waterkeeper Alliance. Hispanic Access Foundation is a nonprofit that develops and connects Latino leaders to influence systems, shape narratives, and drive lasting change. Through trusted relationships and regional networks of leaders moving together, we strengthen community power and advance a thriving nation. Waterkeeper Alliance is a global movement united for clean, healthy, and abundant water for all people and the planet with a mission to protect our right to clean water in communities around the world. We are joined today by Laura Orlando, Caitlin Scott, and Emily Sutton to have an important conversation on sewage, sludge, and biosolids, the waste byproducts created during wastewater treatment that are often spread on farmland, disposed of near communities, or processed in ways many residents never have heard about. This webinar will break down what sludge and biosolids are, how they're created, where they go, and why communities across the country are raising concerns about pollution, water contamination, and public health impacts. Each speaker will present, and it will be followed by a Q&A session where we'll address all your questions at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the chat or Q&A function. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Laura, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Laura Orlando. I am senior scientist at a national nonprofit called Just Zero, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the Boston University School of Public Health. And I have been teaching about, researching, writing about sewage sludge for 3 decades now, and I'm really happy to share a little bit of what I know with you. So what is sewage sludge, right? Next, please. Sewage sludge is the unwanted leftover byproduct of wastewater treatment. For every million gallons of sewage that goes into a wastewater treatment plant, about a ton of sludge comes out. And it is liquid, semi-solid. Uh, if it's a semi-solid, maybe the consistency of mud. It contains whatever goes down the drain and into the sewer system. And one really important thing to keep in mind is it is not just what we flush down our toilets. It's what goes from households into the sewer, but of course, road runoff, um, commercial enterprises, think of like an auto shop, open the yellow pages. Nobody opens the yellow pages anymore. Look at the places, the towns in your town, commercial enterprises, industrial, pharmaceutical companies, etc. They're all on the sewer if you have a sewer. So this is for urban environments. Even some small towns have sewage treatment plants. So the bigger the town, the more people are hooked to the sewer, the more industries and commercial enterprises hooked to the sewer, the more sludge is being produced. So I live in the Boston area. We have one of the largest wastewater treatment plants in the country. It services not just Boston, but 43 communities, north, west, and south of Boston. And it generates about 22% of all of the sludge generated in Massachusetts. Same with New York. New York City generates about 25% of all the sludge generated in New York State. So it's the big cities that are the big problem here. And sewage sludge has different names. It's sometimes called biosolids. It's also called wastewater residuals. Biosolids is an industry term that was created when regulations were first promulgated to use sewage sludge as a fertilizer. And the definition of biosolids is sewage sludge that has somehow been treated, heated, they put lime on it, composted, treated in some way to be land applied to fit into the regulations for land application. And I'm going to get a little bit more into that in the next few slides. So I know this is a busy slide, but I just it's very important to remember that sludge is not only from households, but also from industry. And industry uses millions and millions of pounds of PFAS, forever chemicals, uh, and many, many brominated flame retardants, heavy metals. Everything that goes down the drain can end up in the sewage sludge. And that number two box there, wastewater treatment, another very important thing to remember, wastewater treatment is not meant to remove synthetic chemicals. There's nothing in the treatment process that does that. There's nothing that can do that. You can't flip a switch at any wastewater treatment plant, no matter how new or where it's located, to remove PFAS, for example. What the wastewater treatment plant is trying to do is meet the regulatory requirements for the treated wastewater that goes out an outfall pipe into a receiving body of water, an ocean, a lake, a river. There's nothing in the wastewater treatment plant that's treating sewage sludge or removing chemicals. And so those chemicals that, like solids, will move to the sludge. Plastics, like solids, and I mean like it's the chemistry of the material, moves to the solids. And then that sewage sludge, about half of it in the country is put in landfills, and about half of it is put on farms, bagged, uh, where people put it on their gardens, etc. Next. So, is sewage sludge feces? Is it human waste? No, that's not a good characteristic for what sludge is. Sewage sludge the sludge settles in tanks at the wastewater treatment plant. So it's whatever would settle, but also the wastewater treatment plant is trying to deal with nutrient loads because too many nutrients in receiving body of water changes the aquatic ecosystem of that body of water. Um, and so treatment is really focused on the nutrient load. And to reduce that, pure oxygen is injected into tanks to support the growth of bacteria that will literally consume those nutrients. And then the bodies of that bacteria sloughs off to the bottom of the tanks. So really, sludge is mostly a microbial biomass, if you will, living and dead bacteria primarily generated during wastewater treatment. It also contains pathogens, industrial chemicals, etc. Next. Yeah, that's great. So land application, that's a regulatory term. Land application of sewage sludge in the US. Rules were put forward in 1993 to sewage sludge used to go into landfills. It used to be dumped in the ocean. Major cities would put it on barges, dump it into the ocean. That all changed in the late 1980s. Rules were established in 1993 under the Clean Water Act for, quote, beneficial use of sludge. That was a disaster for water quality, for human health, for soil health, for food safety. Because what it did is it has put of tons, millions and millions of tons of sewage sludge on farmland and other land in the United States. It's legal to do this in all but two states. Maine and Connecticut have banned land application. Maine has been a real beacon on this issue. Um, and has not only banned land application, but they have provided millions of dollars of funding to support farmers who've been impacted by PFAS contaminated sludge and research into like what to do once sewage sludge is on land. Next, please. Sewage sludge is sometimes also processed into pellets. It's mixed with wood chips and then called a compost or a sludge-derived compost, and that is given away or sold in bulk or put in bags. And the most uh, well-known example of that is Milorganite, which you might be able to find in Ace Hardware store near your house or Home Depot. That is a sewage sludge-based product. It contains PFAS. All sewage sludge contains PFAS. I can't stress that enough. And it contains PFAS in very high concentrations. Next. I'm going to skip over this because my understanding is a lot of people on this webinar know what PFAS are. What we all can agree on, no matter where we come at it, is we don't want to drink PFAS. We don't want it in our water. We don't want PFAS in our food. And in prevention is front and center when it comes to protecting our health and our neighbors' health from PFAS. So this 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 shows us the sources of PFAS. They're direct from manufacturing, for instance, or AFFF, firefighting foams that go into rivers and streams where they're doing training exercises. But you can see an indirect, that's all waste related. So the sewer becomes a central place where PFAS are captured because they go down the drain. They go down the drain from households, but especially from industry by the millions of pounds. And that PFAS either goes out with the treated wastewater, which is sometimes called effluent, or it's in the sewage sludge and biosolids. Next, please. Why is land application dangerous? Because that, as mentioned, all sludge has PFAS in it. All sludge has high concentrations of PFAS in it. Don't be fooled by regulations and sometimes laws there that say, well, sewage sludge is okay at 25 parts per billion of PFOS and PFOA. Those are only two PFAS compounds. And even if we only look at those two PFAS compounds, 25 parts per billion is not a health-based standard. That's a feasibility-based standard. States have looked at how much PFOS and PFOA is in the sewage sludge, and they say, well, we reliably always have 15 parts per billion, 18 parts per billion, 20 parts per billion. So let's raise the bar on that so that it's always regulatory within the regulatory framework. It's okay to spread it on land. This is greenwashing. It's causing harm to health, to water, etc. And Maryland just passed the law. Michigan follows this approach. Virginia is going to start following this approach. There's a really concerted effort that you should look out for in your own state for this tiered approach. And again, these are feasibility standards. They're not health-based standards. The draft risk assessment that EPA put out in January 2025 for PFOS and PFOA and sewage sludge put the concentration for single land application at 1 part per billion each. After that, there's, quote, significant risk to the health of a farmer or a family that's drinking the water, eating off that land where sewage sludge was land applied. And so that's kind of the landscape right now. And we're trying to pass laws at the state level that ban land application, or at least provide a moratorium on land application, so that we can really work towards outright ban like Maine has done. And what is very clear is that when sewage sludge is land applied, crops can take up the PFAS depending on the crop. It will go to the fruit, the shoots, the leaves. That PFAS will move to surface water and groundwater, which I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. Um, it enters livestock, beef cattle, for instance. There's a lot of peer-reviewed research about this. This is incontrovertible information. And there's no practical way to remove PFAS from soil once it's there. Again, I know people on this webinar could probably tell me more than I know about PFAS and health. But again, let's skip over this. But what we know is there is no safe level, right? This is why the maximum contamination goal level for PFOS and PFOA in our drinking water is 0, right? Because this is an EPA standard. The goal is 0. And because there is no safe level of PFAS in our drinking water. Next, please. Next slide, please.
It's in the Massachusetts report.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah. So the Massachusetts report, this was released in November of 2025, and anyone on the webinar who wants to know more about this, I wrote a summary of it. I'm happy to share. But they tested all 114 publicly owned wastewater treatment plants in the state. And they looked at the sewage coming in, the treated wastewater going out, and the sewage sludge. And they looked for PFAS. They looked for the total amount of PFAS using, they use three different measurement tools. And one of them looks at 45 different PFAS, one looks at total PFAS, one looks at total fluorine. And those numbers were just through the roof for all 114 wastewater treatment plants. And they found that the sewage sludge had the most concentrated amounts of PFAS in it at all of the plants. And mass sludge is like nearly every other state's sludge. I mean, this is, you'll hear in Maine from industry, for instance, that Maine had a sludge problem because they have paper mills. Yes, paper mills can have really high levels of PFAS in their residuals, but the state of Maine CDC, Maine DEP have established that the PFAS contamination in most of the state from land applied sludge came from municipal wastewater treatment plants. They did not come from paper mill sludges. And I think this mass report where we don't have paper mills here putting their waste products into wastewater treatment plants really shows what if we did the testing in other states, what we would find. And what we really find is like there is no sewage sludge that should be land applied. And PFAS is just one family of chemicals, by the way. There's other endocrine disruptors, microplastics, et cetera, in sewage sludge that we don't want on our soil, we don't want in our water, and we certainly don't want in our food. Next, please. Who opposes land application? There's a new coalition called the Coalition for Sludge-Free Land that started last year, and we crowdsource information. We work together to promote whatever we can do to stop the land application of sludge, and and of course there are farmers and other individuals working on PFAS and other pollutants who are working to end the land application of sludge. And those who support it are industry that benefits, and there's only a handful of companies that haul and dispose of sewage sludge. They get contracts to do this from wastewater treatment plants, and there are billions of dollars at stake. So when we change the policy, and we are going to change the policy, we may put dollars in different pockets. That's why there's such pushback from industry. Next, please. Just Zero has a legislative toolkit, how to write legislation. Go to the site and you can learn more about it. I really encourage you, if you're writing legislation or interested in it, to use the toolkit. Next, please. And then, a call to action. Let's band together. Let's work together. Let's help educate our neighbors. We really need to stop this practice and stop the money train to the industry that's benefiting off of it and pushing back so hard to keep the status quo. And then next is a list of resources. There are many, many more. If you need, I have a resource. A much larger resource page, please get in touch with me. I'm happy to send it to anyone. And so thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura, for that background on Biosludge. Now we are going to move over to Caitlin. Caitlin, take it away.
Thank you. Hi there, everyone. My name is Caitlin, and I'm the water protector at Spokane River Keeper. We work in the Spokane River watershed to protect and restore the Spokane River for future generations, and we're a member of the Waterkeeper Alliance as well. You can go next slide. Just to familiarize everybody with where I'm at, I'm here on the Spokane River in eastern Washington. Our watershed extends up into North Idaho and a little bit into western Montana, but mostly North Idaho and Washington. Our river is 111 miles long. It flows from Lake Coeur d'Alene all the way out to the Columbia River. And it covers about 6,600 square miles across the entire watershed. Our river is also deeply connected to the Spokane Valley Rastrum Prairie Aquifer. Water is exchanged really back and forth across the upper river as it moves through our watershed. And the groundwater is very shallow here. We have lots of smaller aquifers that are above this major aquifer, but this main aquifer is the sole source of drinking water for both Spokane County and Kootenai County, which is about 600,000 people. All right, we can go to the next slide here. The Spokane River really has two major pathways for PFAS, which Laura kind of touched on as major pathways for most watersheds. These are our municipal treatment plant and biosolids. As Laura explained, the municipal treatment plants are not really designed to remove or monitor for PFAS, so these chemicals really just pass through to biosolids and to the effluents undetected and really unmonitored in large part. We focus our sampling in large part near the Riverside Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is the treatment plant for the city of Spokane and also the largest biosolids program in our region. This program distributes Class B biosolids sludge to 18 different sites across 3 different counties. Most of these sites are dryland sites that are growing crops for animal feed, mostly animal feed. Some of it is also turned into commercial compost that's sold locally here under a label Bartech, it's called. We did all of our studying through the Waterkeeper Alliance sampling studies, both at the treatment plant and the biosolids program were identified as sources to the watershed. And our biosolids results were especially alarming. They caused something like a 3,000% increase in our small tributaries. Most of our sampling was done in the Little Spokane watershed, which has a small aquifer beneath it as well. And this is all dryland agriculture. There was no rain during our sampling period, so a lot of what we're seeing we're suspecting is connected to groundwater and movement of PFAS through groundwater through to our surface waters. So we can go to the next slide. One of the main sources of PFAS contamination in our region comes from the West Plains and the historic use of the West Plains by the Air Force. We've had Geiger Field here, which became Spokane's International Airport, which was a longstanding Air Force base. Eventually, we also built Fairchild Air Force Base, which houses a number of refueling jets and refueling tankers that used AFF, I can't not pronounce it, the firefighting foam that contains PFAS. Because of this, there was significant research done on the West Plains to look at different sources, and they found significant contamination in the groundwater across the West Plains that is also reaching surface waters and moving into the tributaries of our Spokane River system. One important and really overlooked piece of this system is the septic waste that comes out of the West Plains. Most of the West Plains is individual homeowners that rely on septic systems. They're not connected to a municipal treatment plant. And the only facility that can accept that septic waste is the Riverside Wastewater Treatment Plant. So they're accepting all of the contaminated waste from these places that have contaminated water. There's been drinking water studies done across the West Plains that show within this little bubble that's shown here on this map, there's significant contamination to drinking water wells at individuals' houses, and those houses as a result, have to send their septic waste to Riverside Wastewater Treatment Plant. That means that this PFAS is flowing through the groundwater septic systems and not just staying localized here in the West Plains. It's being consolidated over in the single treatment system that's already been identified as a PFAS source, and then being redistributed as biosolids across multiple counties in our state. So you end up with multiple pathways converging here: groundwater contamination, septic flows, and wastewater treatment, all eventually intersecting into our river and downstream. One of the reasons why this is really important to us is because of fish consumption. A 2023 Environmental Working Group analysis found that eating just one serving of contaminated fish can be as harmful to you as drinking PFAS contaminated water for a month, levels above health benchmarks. In 2023, the Washington State Environmental Agency sampled the Spokane River for fish tissue for PFAS for the first time ever, and they found some pretty significant levels that were above some of the recommendations in other areas of our state. On the west side, there are a couple lakes that actually have consumption advisories. And these levels that we were seeing in our river were above those human health advisories. These are fish that people eat. We have subsistence fishers and tribes that rely on these fish for subsistence um, year round. And this contamination is really important for us to be aware of and monitor as it's likely building up and for years before it was even beginning to be measured. Next slide. There's growing attention locally, fueled in large part by the issue on the West Plains, as it's affecting a lot of individuals in their drinking water. Just this month, we had state funding that was approved for a basin-wide PFAS study to help us better understand the sources and contamination levels. Along with that came some support for the city of Spokane to evaluate the wastewater treatment facility directly and identify ways that the treatment facility can improve um, response to PFAS and remove PFAS at the facility. Our organization has also been working to support this broader effort, helping connect and support partners involved in the basin-wide research effort, particularly as we get underway to map out sources and pathways across the watershed. Right now, most of the work has been focused on the West Plains, so we're really excited to see this expand beyond the West Plains and beyond our waterkeeper research and really see what's going on watershed-wide. We've also worked really hard to advocate with the city of Spokane to expand monitoring and sampling. That's part of why they applied for this grant to begin with, to get some of this monitoring done. And they've participated in some monitoring similar to that Massachusetts study. Washington did a statewide wastewater treatment study, and the city participated in that as well. So we're looking at advocating where they can expand monitoring within the industrial pretreatment program specifically, because there are a lot of industries in our region that likely have high levels of PFAS that enter the West Stream before it's ever reaches that treatment plant. And we've also been pushing to look at those septic contributions from the West Plains that are routed to the Riverside treatment system. We'd really like to see those sampled before they're um, enter the treatment system so we know what's actually coming out of the West Plains and those septics. But a really big major part of this work is also public education. We're working on an effort to better inform the public about fish consumption risks in the Spokane River system, because while we have data showing that PFAS is in the fish tissue, that information isn't translated into clear, accessible guidance for the public. And we don't know what the risk is because a lot of the fish that were tested are not the primary game fish. Because these are forever chemicals, it's really important that the public be informed about these risks and how to avoid them. This work is really, for us, is all about closing gaps in monitoring and understanding so that people in this watershed can make informed decisions about their water, their food, and their health. Thank you. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. Now we will hand it over to Emily.
Hey y'all. I am gonna try my best to keep this to 15 minutes, but I'll just start by saying that I can and do talk about sludge way too much. So if you have more questions, you can shoot me an email and I will happily talk about sludge. Haw River Assembly has been working on this issue since before I started. I'm the river keeper and executive director at Haw River Assembly. We are a riverkeeper organization based in central North Carolina in the Piedmont and Triad area. So I have a relatively small watershed compared to my other North Carolina friends. I have a watershed of about 10 counties, and it's a pretty good mix of very, very urban, Durham, Greensboro, Burlington areas, if you've heard of those towns, but also a lot of rural agriculture areas. So sludge has been an issue for us for a very long time. And yeah, we'll kind of get into this a little bit of how not only, how we work on sludge, but I want to provide you all with tools to figure out if this is an issue for your communities and kind of give you a playbook for how we do this research and help the people that are impacted. So, um, the Haw is a threatened watershed for a lot of reasons. Laura and Caitlin already really did a good job talking about PFAS. PFAS has been one of the main issues in the Haw River watershed that we've been working on for the past 10 years. Also, 1,4-dioxane, which is another industrial contaminant that we find in a lot of our sludge facilities. So you can go to the next slide, Vanessa. Thanks. Okay, so I would love to be able to click this, but I'm just gonna talk through it. I wanted to give you all a tool of maps. Obviously, these are North Carolina specific, but I look at these biosolids data maps regularly. So because we're in a watershed that has so many PFAS and 1,4-dioxane issues, most of our communities know about this, which is a big it's been a success in the past 2 years, I guess, to just make sure that everybody at least knows what PFAS and 1,4-dioxane are. So that's been a big change. But now that people are aware of this, we get calls all the time of like people that are concerned that their groundwater is impacted and will try to figure out if they have a reasonable risk. So every blue dot on this map is a land applied biosolids field. I call it sludge. Laura mentioned that there's a lot of different names for this. The industry calls it biosolids, so I try to correct people a lot. Um, so these are our sludge fields, and every dot I can click on, and you can see this little pop-up box here, and it'll show me exactly where the sludge is sourced from, which is really important. That doesn't tell us all the information that we need. Not all sludge is created equally. So we'll talk about it in the next slide just a minute, but one of the really important parts for me has been to make friends in our regulatory agencies. A lot of us work in pretty conservative states where our state regulatory agencies are very underfunded or staffed by people that don't really have the same agendas that we do as environmental activists. But there's a lot of folks in our North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality that have been a little more candid as we've built trust. And so making friends in regulatory agencies has proven to be one of my best assets. I can talk to anybody, and asking the right questions and not revealing too much gets you a long way to like figuring out where the problems are and what they know and what they might not be sharing. So make friends with regulatory agency staff. That comes back in later on in my presentation. But when we have these land application fields, if I know that one of these sources, like this one on the pop-up box is City of Graham, if I know that City of Graham has a really high industrial load of PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, I'm going to knock on doors. I'm going to make sure that the people that live next to those sludge fields are aware of what's going on. And sometimes the agriculture or the people that live there are willingly receiving that waste as land applied biosolids or free fertilizer for their farms. For us, a lot of these fields are actually owned by the municipality themselves. So this specific example that's highlighted here, we had a pretty serious crisis in a tiny little rural community called Swepsonville. You can see it kind of center of that map there. There are 6 homes that literally border the sludge field for the city of Graham. So they are sandwiched between the sludge field and a pre-regulatory landfill or an unlined landfill. So I knocked on doors and I introduced myself. I gave them a free PFAS test kit from Cyclopure. I don't know if y'all use that company or not. But the levels were astronomical. I mean, we had over 600 parts per trillion of total PFAS in these people's wells. So you can go to the next slide. So I mentioned that that's not the only tool that we use. When I find out that a sludge field is owned by the city of Graham, for example, I can go into our environmental application tracker map and I can click on that facility, and that's where I can get all of their permit data. So I can look at their permit data, I can get a list of all of their pre-treatment users or significant industrial users, and I can cross-check that to see if any of those industries could be discharging high levels of PFAS or 1,4-dioxane. I should back up and say that most of my dischargers in the Haw River watershed go through wastewater treatment plants. We don't have a lot of direct dischargers like I don't know who, if Kemp is on this call, but Kemp is downstream of me in the Cape Fear River. And so Kemp's big issue is one discharge from an industry called Chemours. Chemours was a spinoff of DuPont, massive levels of PFAS coming from that facility, but that was one bad actor. So it was one case that it was easier to pinpoint. Whereas for us, we have to go through wastewater treatment plants. The wastewater treatment plants hold the permit. So therefore, all of these industries that are listed on that pre-treatment permit are shielded by that wastewater treatment plant. So when we filed a notice of intent to sue a city for PFAS discharges, we had to sue the city rather than the industries that were responsible because that wastewater treatment plant held the permit. Okay, Vanessa, you can go to the next one. So once, this is a lot of detail, but I'm a detail-oriented person and I want to give you all the tools that you need to do this work. So the EPA has a resource called PFAS handling codes. And when you pull a permit for a wastewater treatment plant, you can see what their SIC codes are. So an SIC code is just tells you what kind of industry it is. It's like a very quick number that the regulatory agencies pull to make sure that it's cross-checked with the type of industry they say they are. But the EPA has a resource that says exactly what SIC codes are associated with PFAS. So I'll make sure that all of these resources are available that we can share. I will via Vanessa. Thank you so much. But all of these industries are, it lists the codes that are associated with PFAS. So this is kind of a three-step process when people reach out to me and they send me an email or they call me and they're like, Emily, I'm on groundwater. I don't know if I should be concerned. Can I fill up my kid's water bottle to send it to school? And so I'll look at all of these to make sure that we know if it's a risk or not. You can go to the next one. So we also have a lot of pre-regulatory landfills. So pre-regulatory just means unlined. So a lot of these landfills are outdated and they're supposed to have monitoring wells around them, but those monitoring wells don't measure for PFAS. They're not required to measure for PFAS. They'll measure for nitrates and nitrites, which often is really high in groundwater around these landfills. But this one that I have pulled up specifically for you is the one that is sandwiched on the other side of my Swepsonville community. So we actually started doing groundwater monitoring at the homes and then in the neighboring streams to get a better sense of what the PFAS and 1,4-dioxane loads are. And we were able to isolate with other hydrologists, people that know groundwater way better than I do, able to isolate what compounds were coming from the landfill versus the sludge fields. And you can go to the next one. So this is that specific example. We monitored all of those little red dots are private wells for homes. And so we worked with the DEQ to do a lot of outreach, knock on doors, introduce ourselves, hold public meetings, to really understand what the options were. And North Carolina has a program called the Bernard Allen Fund, where if we show that these numbers exceed a federal MCL, which there is still maybe one for the two PFAS, then those homeowners will qualify for assistance. And so these are the types of assistance that we were able to give them. They have under the sink reverse osmosis, whole house carbon filters, or they just wanted to receive bottled water. And you can go to the next one. And this is that map that I was mentioning that we were able to pinpoint what the source was by looking at what the signature of PFAS were. And so you can see that all of these clustered pie charts in the middle are the same type of source versus this junkyard well way over there, which doesn't have any of those blue longer chain PFAS. So that's kind of the way that we have worked to discover these and do research and figure out where the problems are. But once we figure out the problems, we have to also provide solutions. One criticism that I've very openly had of a lot of our academic partners who give us funding to do the sampling and help do the analysis for us. We love our academic partners, but all of those data points are real people. And we can't just show up and deliver devastating news and not deliver solutions at the same time. So we're working on policy right now, and this is a lot of this is very specific to North Carolina, so some of it will translate. But in North Carolina, there is authority that wastewater treatments have already right now without additional legislation to require PFAS removal and at least monitoring in those pretreatment permits. So if Vanessa is a wastewater treatment plant owner and operator, and I'm a textile industry, Vanessa can tell me that if I'm going to send my waste to her facility, I have to do this. That's her authority, and that's how we've done it in several of our litigation cases against cities with PFAS issues. So, other than that, we've looked at when we don't know where the source is, whether it's biosolids or a landfill, the state government can initiate CERCLA and RCRA cases. So that's when I get back to making friends. If you have made friends and built trust and built relationships with people in those positions, you can really bring them to the table to meet these impacted communities and have those moms who are concerned about filling up their water bottle call them and make sure that they're engaged in that whole issue. Lastly, we have a fund in North Carolina that I mentioned, the Bernard Allen Fund, that we advocate for more funds from the General Assembly every year to be allocated that way so we can support folks. And then this transition to PowerPoint kind of lost my link here, but Vanessa, if you could just click that Water Safety Act, we're really proud of this bill that we've been able to push. I don't know that it will pass. It just got reintroduced this year, but we're working really hard to move it. Um, Maybe just throw it in the chat, Vanessa, so people can look at it. But I'll just quickly talk through it. There's funds in there for PFAS mitigation for utilities. And so if drinking water facilities downstream need to do mitigation, they can apply for grants to do that. There's also funds for wastewater treatment plants to investigate where their sources are so they can put the responsibility on the source, not the wastewater treatment plant. That's how you get it out of the sludge in the first place. If the water coming to the wastewater treatment plant no longer has PFAS in it because it's being taken out at the industrial site, it's not getting into the sludge, it's not getting onto farmers' fields, it's not getting into our groundwater. So that's really what we're focused on. This bill also requires our state to set regulatory limits on discharge permits, which is what we've been advocating for many years. And also just a quick mention on this photo. I take people to the legislative building with me regularly to talk to their representatives. If you don't do that, you should. The representatives already know what I'm going to say before I walk into the door. But if I bring a bunch of other people with me, it really makes a difference. This is our libertarian llama. He lingers around the legislative building. I hate to assume anyone's politics. His human is a libertarian, and we do not get along about what waters should be regulated, but the llama is cute. So, okay, you can go to the next one. I think that's all I got. Thanks, y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. And that's the power of storytelling, right? The more you bring more communities together to share the story, the bigger the impact. Wonderful. Well, thank you to our presenters for sharing. And now we can move on to our Q&A section.
Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. If you don't know me, I'm Chelsea with Waterkeeper Alliance, and I'll be facilitating our Q&A today. Again, big thank you to our speakers. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. I know this is a subject that can get very specific very quickly, or folks have concerns specifically about their watershed. I feel like you should feel safe and welcome to ask those questions today, and we'll try to get you the best answers. Um, but to start us off, I feel like every time I have a conversation with someone about sludge, they're like, okay, but what do we do with it then? And then an answer is often landfills. But then we've been hearing about the different problems landfills can also cause with PFAS. And then so I was hoping our speakers could break down kind of the nuances of landfills and what we're talking about with that, and different kind of solutions for sludge. Anyone wants to jump in?
I don't mind jumping in first. We're always going to have sludge. That's like when we first started talking about PFAS, I worked with a lot of EPA folks and they would like visibly shut down when I started talking about sludge because it was a rock that they did not want to turn over. Um, we're always going to have it. So our recommendation is that we remove it at the industry level. It's a lot more effective to treat 10 million or 1 million gallons a day versus 10 million at a wastewater treatment plant. So if we're having an industry remove their PFAS at their site before it ever goes to a wastewater treatment plant, it's not in the sludge to begin with.
I'll also just add that when we're talking about landfills, landfills also already have a lot of contaminated materials coming into them, and being able to focus on one site when we're talking about these contaminations as opposed to widespread contamination, there's a lot more ability to address it if we're, able to focus on smaller land areas.
And we need to, landfills are a short-term solution. We need to make sure the sewage sludge is going into engineered landfills, lined landfills, which leak. They're not, but they're problematic as well, but they're better than unlined landfills. And that they should, they go into landfills, and all of the leachate that comes out of the landfill should be treated on site. Just what Emily was saying, it's a lot easier to treat that on site for PFAS removal, for instance, and I mean treat for the chemicals of emerging concern like PFAS, before it goes to a wastewater treatment plant, because that is where leachate from line landfill goes. And then volume reduction. Then we have medium term and long term solutions in sewage sludge volume reduction. Let's make less of it. We know how to do that. We're not doing it in all the places that we could do it. And then rethinking the wastewater treatment plant, side stream technologies, other things that produce less sewage sludge. And there's bench science on that, but we need more funding to really put these things to use at scale.
Perfect. Thank you all. We have another question in the chat from Jackie Elliott. What is an effective argument for those proposing tech solutions to removing PFAS from sludge, with the outcome that resources and energy are diverted from taking care of the current problem with approaches that help?
Tech solutions don't deal with current harm. And a lot of time, a technical solution is a lot of hype. For instance, destroying PFAS and sewage sludge. It's never been done. Burning sludge at whatever temperature often will just move the PFAS from one medium to another, to the air, to the biochar. And then what PFAS are we talking about being destroyed? Which of the 15,000 and counting compounds are we talking about here? And so it really is a lot of hype that's not protecting the public. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the research. Let's do the research. Let's do it. Try to think about things going to scale. But let's protect people from harms right now. And what Emily was talking about, the numbers are people, and PFAS contamination in your water and on your land is devastating. We need to protect people.
Thank you. Another question, this one from Heather. One of our wastewater treatment facilities did some testing of everything they take in, and while industrial sources were a slice, they found other municipal waste was the biggest. In other words, from us. Any thoughts on how to address this issue?
Well, I mean, there's certainly states various states are passing packaging laws. They're working on addressing PFAS at the source, including the PFAS that comes into our home, that's in cosmetics, that's in products that we use in the shower, etc. And that is terrific work. We need to turn off the spigot. We need to just turn off the PFAS spigot. And people are working on that from many different directions. So yeah, it's very true. What's coming out of homes in certain places is an absolute slice of the contamination pie. And we need to, but that still has an industry link. That's still Chemours, that's still DuPont, that's still 3M. Those are the industries pushing PFAS, using PFAS, that's getting into our home. So we got to go up that chain and make those industries address the pollution.
I'll also just add that one of the first concerns that I have with that statement is what's in your drinking water? Because it's coming from somewhere else. We're not producing PFAS in our bodies. And if your wastewater is the highest source, then what's the drinking water look like?
Thank you. Um, we have another question coming in from Alabama with an obligatory roll tide, in which we do not have a state regulatory agency that is willing to share where the application sites are. Love the use of the SIC codes to find the wastewater treatment plants. Does anyone have experience with pushing agencies to have more transparency on where the sites are throughout their watershed?
I wonder if that's not like I think it's a federal requirement that they have to disclose where the sites are, but maybe they're disclosing it in like a paper application that's in a file cabinet in the back of someone's office. We had an issue with CAFOs like this a couple years ago with manure hauling records. And so I mean, somebody who has more legal chops than I do should maybe comment on that. But I think that it's required that it has to be disclosed. But there's not a requirement for how it's disclosed. So that would be my first question.
Yeah, we don't have a fancy map like Emily has of land application sites. And to find ours, we actually had the Waterkeeper Alliance during the phase 2 of the study. They had to do a public records request to get the land application site information.
Yeah, the federal regulations, they're called Part 503s in the for land application in the Clean Water Act. Divide sludge is either Class A or Class B. Class B sludge is less. It's all about odor and pathogens. Okay, it's that distinguishes the two. And Class B sludge is required according to the federal rules to have a permit. The states issue the permit, so you're right there, Emily. The states issue the permit, and what they do with that permit is anybody's guess, whether you can see it or not see it, whether it was actually the permit was issued and the sludge was spread or not. Class A sludge, which is pelletized, composted, limed, uh, or otherwise processed to meet the regulatory requirement for Class A, there is no tracking of it. So the 100 tons a day that come out of Boston of pelletized sewage sludge. I heat it with natural gas, turn it into little pellets. There are no rules about tracking where that goes. So it's a major problem. And I really admire the work of people people like you, Emily, have like these maps and have really tracked it. It really helps us all understand the scope of the problem.
I wonder too, I mean, I kind of assume that it's because they don't want everyone to know, but in the case that it's not, it would be helpful to just argue that like, oh, if the state doesn't have capacity for this, we have a really wonderful intern who has mapping skills. Let her get the access to all of those paper files and put it in a map for you. We'd love to do that. Um, so yeah, I know that our state always screams that they don't have capacity to do anything, and so if we can offer to do their job for them on a nonprofit salary, I am obviously salty about it, but it builds relationships.
Perfect. Thank you for all those thoughts. We have a question from Mbake, the Han Bay keeper, in Senegal. So the Senegalese government plans to put the sewage water after secondary treatment in a marine area to protect in 2 kilometers to the coastline. Is there a treatment that we know of for seawater that's exposed to the sludge?
I think he's talking about the treated wastewater, right? Sewage water.
I
So
believe so.
that's not sludge. And so that's the depending on the level of treatment, that's got solids in it, it could after secondary treatment. So uh yeah, there's no treatment. Once it's in the seawater, it's in the seawater. It's kind of goes back to, I think it was Emily saying, it's a lot easier to treat 1 million gallons of something than 100 million gallons of something. So it's there. You have to prevention is the key to that answer. Don't put it there.
All right. And then another question from Michael Mullen. Do others have sites on military facilities that should be Superfund sites that are instead listed as waste management or waste minimization sites? He believes that it's done to lower the profile and keep it off the public radar. Any thoughts?
I think this is what they've done with Fairchild, but I'm not totally positive. And I think that because it has been really off the public radar what they're doing. And we have Fairchild Air Force Base, which is a federal Air Force facility, but it overlaps with the area that is the Spokane International Airport. And we've seen the county and the city who own that airport taking a lot more responsibility than, and publicly at least, than the Air Force. Um, and and I think it's exactly that. They're not wanting to list it and they don't want to do much about it because they want to keep it off the public radar, especially after the initial contamination was found and heavily blamed the Air Force for obvious reasons. I mean, they were using AFF like crazy, and at this tanker site. So I'm pretty sure that's what's happened for us too, Michael, but I'd have to double check, make sure that was what Fairchild is listed.
Perfect. I think that was a rapid fire round of questions. We've done most of the ones that are in the chat, and we're getting close to time. Um, Laura said this earlier, but I'm just going to reemphasize this, that lots of groups are working on addressing these issues on the ground. And there's obviously so much we can learn from each other already with these speakers today. I've learned so much, even though I've listened to you all talk about sludge many times before, because it's just an endless subject. So please feel free to reach out to me and I can help get you coordinated with different coalitions working on this issue, from a variety of perspectives. And just want to thank our speakers one more time and excited to continue to indoctrinate people into the fight of sludge.
Thank you all. And if you have any other questions, you can send them through email, and we'll be sharing the recording and any resources after this call. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.